Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Fern, and I am the Non-Human Rights Project's Director of Government Relations and Campaigns, and I am trying to figure out where to look. I'm zooming in from West Hollywood, California, and I'm just going to disclaimer, I think all of my pets knew I was filming, and they're all around me right now, so you may hear some noise, and they're already trying to make appearances, so it's a real. This is who will be barking if you if you hear him. I think the joys of working from home. So I'm Courtney. I've been with the Non-Human Rights Project for a little over 2 years. Prior to joining the NhRP, I worked in animal advocacy for about 3 years. I worked at 2 different animal welfare organizations. My role in one organization was to oversee the grassroots and legislative advocacy for said organization in the state of California. And in another organization, I worked as the director of campaigns, and I oversaw all of the campaigns that this international animal advocacy group had. And prior to that, I had worked in environmental law. So that's my background. And I've really enjoyed working at the Non-Human Rights Project. When I was first learning about it and approached by Kevin to bring me on to the team, I was really excited by the uniqueness of the work being done and the direct approach that the NhRP takes at addressing the suffering of non-human animals by working towards the underlying cause, which is the loss of freedom. And the only way to ensure non-human animals do not suffer human-caused harm is through the recognition of their rights. And just based on my experience working for animal welfare organizations, while welfare laws are incredibly important, there are a series of small steps in the right direction where the work we're doing is one giant leap. We're all working towards the same goal. It's just a different path of getting there. And a primary difference too is that we're working towards rights versus alleviating certain sufferings or prohibiting various harms, like say with elephants, banning the use of the bull hook. While that helps lessen the suffering of an elephant, it doesn't, they're still suffering. They're still being exploited by circuses or in zoos or deprived of their freedom and their autonomy. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the work we're doing, is we're really working towards the root of the harms that are being caused and inflicted upon non-human animals. And I keep referring down, I have an outline because there's a lot I want to go over and I don't want to miss anything. So as the Director of Government Relations and Campaigns, I oversee just broadly the grassroots and legislative advocacy for the organization. And when I came in, I really have been putting together concrete legislative strategy plans, as well as campaigns that can be companion campaigns to our ongoing and future litigation, as well as campaigns independent of our litigation and legislation. So an overall, mobilizing an overall movement for non-human animal rights. So there's a lot that goes into what I do. And I know a lot of people had submitted questions, sort of like what a typical day looks like. And that's really hard to go over. Just generally, a lot of what I do is researching and executing legislative strategy, identifying cities and states that we would like to work on legislation in, and speaking to lawmakers and legislative staff about non-human animal rights, how it's different from welfare, why it's needed, working on legislative materials such as drafting fact sheets, condensing and outlining the scientific evidence supporting non-human animals' autonomy. I don't know if many of you have read the affidavits submitted by our scientific experts, such as Dr. Joyce Poole, Cynthia Moss, Dr. Jane Goodall, who's also a board member, but condensing that down because it is pretty voluminous and hard to digest if you don't have a science background. So condensing that down so it's easy to be understood by people that don't have a science background and just want to learn more about why we feel that certain non-human animals, their right to liberty, should and must be recognized and protected by the legislature. drafting legislation, and that varies based on the city that we're going to be working in. Certain cities have rules that you have to follow in terms of the language that you have to put in there, and we also have to take into consideration whether it's going to be a symbolic ordinance, meaning that no animals will be impacted. Say we want to, like the city of West Hollywood, where I'm based in, there are no elephants held captive here. There are no great apes held captive here. There are no cetaceans held captive here. So if we were to pass legislation, it wouldn't have a direct impact. It would still be important, but when we're drafting legislation, we have to take into consideration whether or not a specific animal will be impacted when it goes into effect. I also, work for advocating for our clients with legislators and before legislative bodies. Like for many, we've been working with Senator Blumenthal, as well as state lawmakers and local officials. With HAPPY in New York, we've been engaging with the New York City Council, the New York City Mayor, and we've been successful in getting some of them to come out in support of Happy's freedom. And I also oversee the companion campaigns that go along with our litigation. I don't know if any of you saw or participated in our rallies that were held in the Bronx for Happy's freedom, or we held a rally for calling for the Comerford elephants to be free to sanctuary when they were in Worcester, Massachusetts. Also creating change.org petitions, which I know some people can feel they're not as impactful as action alerts, but they are, especially when you can get for Happy. There are over, I think we're close to 1.5 million people have signed calling for her freedom and released to a sanctuary. And for the Comerford elephants, it's almost 400,000 people. And that says something when that many people have taken the time to to show their support for their freedom, and legislators and even the entities that are holding these non-human animals captive do take stock in that. So we do petitions. We also do action alerts addressing specific targeting specific people. With Happy, we had an action alert urging Jim Breheny, the executive director of the Bronx Zoo, to take action to free her to a sanctuary. Over 13,000 people submitted an email to Breheny, and that elicited a response from him. So it was very impactful. And doing whatever we can to gain support for our clients' freedoms and keeping up to date on their status and any news that's going on related to them. So that's sort of an overview of my work. And yeah, so I'll go over the basics of our legislation. So right now initially we're going to be working on local ordinances. And the reason we're starting at the local level versus the state or federal is because it makes sense to start small and get the buy-in from local jurisdictions, and then we can move on to the state level. So we can show, like, we've decided we want to have our first, we want to work on our first local legislation to be in the state of California. So if we were to say get the cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, smaller cities like Santa Barbara, cities in Riverside, to pass ordinances recognizing the rights of non-human animals, it's more likely that a state then would sort of rubber stamp that and pass a state bill or state law. And then, we can move on to various states. And it doesn't mean that we're going to solely focus on California, but it just makes sense. It's in the broader scheme of things to work at a local level. And then go from there, and it really just builds momentum. And this is what's been done in past social justice movements, and we do see this as a social justice movements. We're seeking to have the rights, the fundamental rights of non-human animals recognized and protected, and it's never been done before. And so we need to start small, get that buy-in, and then we can go bigger and really have this be a national movement. So that's where we're starting off. And our ordinance, as I said a little bit earlier, depending on where we introduce it or which legislative body it's before, the wording will probably be different. But overall, it will address and remedy the underlying cause of the suffering of non-human animals, which is the deprivation and loss of their freedom. And broadly speaking, it will be no longer possible to exploit the designated species within that jurisdiction or hold them captive in a manner that denies them of their autonomy. And we do want to leave room so that sanctuaries, real accredited sanctuaries, can exist. And that's why we put they can't be held captive, or in our mind, in an environment that denies them of their autonomy, because sanctuaries are the best opportunity for animals held captive in the United States to regain their autonomy, and they are allowed to live in environments similar to their natural habitat, engage in their innate behaviors, and form groups with members of their same species. So that's why we would do that. And we would hope that in the legislation that it would require the designated species, if there is one that's impacted or in that area, to be held in a place that, again, gives them the space and freedom that meets their psychological, behavioral, and physical needs. And some people have asked what an ordinance is. It's an enforceable rule enacted by a legislative body. It's just another word for a law. And you know, depending on what type of legislation we're seeking, it might not be an ordinance, it might be a state law, could be a federal bill. You know, we could go before different legislative bodies that call it different things, but ultimately we're seeking to have an enforceable rule that recognizes and protects the right to certain non-human animals, the right of certain non-human animals for them to have bodily liberty recognized and to live freely. So far, the legislative process, it's been I think it's been going pretty well. I know we haven't been able to talk a lot publicly about what we're going on, and that's because a lot of the foundational work the foundation is being laid, and we had to spend a significant amount of time researching where is the best location to start working on non-human rights legislation. We determined that to be California. California, in most areas for animal welfare law, is the most progressive state. And I like to say we just because I live here, so I'm proud of that. But we passed the most expansive animal welfare laws, and it seems that the lawmakers, both at a local and state level, really understand the importance of protecting non-human animals. And also there's strong public support for protecting the rights and welfare, or I won't say rights because we haven't gotten there yet, but the welfare of non-human animals and protecting them from certain harms. And so we're starting in California, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking at other states. And I welcome anyone, if you live in a state or if you live in a city that you think is right for non-human rights legislation, please, you can send Mickey, Lauren, or myself an email, and I'm happy to start looking into what we can possibly do to work on legislation in your area. But right now we're looking at California. Specifically, we're working in Los Angeles, and the conversations I've had thus far with the Los Angeles City Council members and some of their staffers has been very positive, and that's very uplifting and exciting. But we've also been talking with lawmakers in other cities who we've both approached certain elected officials, and we ourselves have been approached by both state and federal lawmakers about enacting non-human rights legislation. And so far it's been pretty positive. We're pretty much finalized in terms of developing our draft legislative language, as well as the legislative materials that we'll use when we go and advocate before various legislative bodies. right now, similar to with our litigation, we're working to secure the rights for self-aware autonomous animals that science has shown to have extraordinarily complex cognitive abilities. So elephants, chimpanzees, other great apes, and cetaceans. And we're very excited with the success of the Whale Sanctuary Project and having successfully securing a location for their sanctuary. And so we can get started and moving forward in working on, actively working on securing rights for cetaceans through litigation and legislation. Yeah. So that's what we've been doing for legislation so far. And let's see the questions. You know, some people have asked what the difference is between our litigation and our legislation. With our litigation, like Monica spoke about last week, we're seeking to have the rights of one specific, or when we file on behalf of multiple clients, our client, that those specific clients' rights recognized by the courts, and then to be free to a sanctuary. With the legislation, it's a little more broad in terms of the scope. We're seeking to have any member of a designated species to have their rights recognized and protected within that specific jurisdiction. So rather than having to go individual animal by individual animal, we're able to go an entire species at once. And so it's a little more expansive, and that's what we're seeking to have done. And it complements the work that we're doing with our litigation, because it's just advancing the movement for non-human animal rights. And unlike our litigation, advocates like yourselves that are watching can play a more direct role in the passage of non-human animal rights legislation, depending on whether or not you live in the certain city or jurisdiction that we're attempting to have legislation passed. You can contact your city council member, your county supervisor, your state representative or assembly member, or state senator, the governor, the mayor. And if you don't live in that specific jurisdiction, you can still get involved by sharing posts about it. You know, once we start working and action alerts, and encouraging your friends and family members that live in that specific area to support and get involved in that legislation, or that campaign for legislation. Additionally, you can also, once we get started, encourage your elected officials to work on animal rights legislation. I'm happy to share with anyone the materials that we've put together and sort of share the tips of what's worked along the way, and you know, what we've seen to be helpful, and what maybe not hasn't been, as well as who might be coming up, might oppose rights legislation. We're not naive in thinking that this is going to be smooth sailing just because so far discussions have gone well. There are lots of people that do not support having the rights of non-human animals recognized, and we have to be prepared to come up against them and, like with our litigation, aggressively advocate for the rights of animals. So that's where we are with legislation. And I should just add to our knowledge, there has been no animal rights legislation passed in the US that gives any non-human animal species an enforceable right. I know there have been some resolutions that have been passed, or rights of nature that do encompass animals, but there has been no defined enforceable right in legislation that has been passed. So this would be the first of its kind. And much like our litigation, we'll be very excited if any legislative body introduces legislation just to be considered for non-human animal rights, because that's a very important first step. This is going to be a long fight, and we're going to need everyone's help, but we're really excited about where we're going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our campaigns, our active campaigns right now on behalf of Happy, Minnie, as well as touch upon what's going on with Tommy and Keiko, who are Tommy was our first client, our chimpanzee client. So with Happy, I know a lot of people are interested in what's going on with Happy and what you can do to help secure her freedom. Our campaign for Happy has been incredibly successful. We've gotten buy-in from numerous celebrities as well as elected officials in New York City who have come out in support of Happy's freedom and are publicly urging the Bronx Zoo and the Wildlife Conservation Society, which operates the Bronx Zoo, to send Happy to the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee. It's sort of Happy's plight from a campaign standpoint sort of went viral after we held our first rally in June of last year. A journalist named Yashar Ali, who is very passionate about elephants, learned about Happy and learned about the work that we were doing, both our campaign and our litigation, and did a Twitter thread that went viral. Numerous celebrities and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez commented and tweeted and were calling for Happy's freedom, which was super exciting. And then from there, we were able to start engaging, having meaningful conversations with high-level elected officials in New York City. And New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson came out publicly and requested that the Bronx Zoo send Happy and Patty, the other elephant held captive with her, to the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee or the Performing Animal Welfare Society in California. And those are the only two accredited elephant sanctuaries in the United States at the moment. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, also came out and stated that something didn't feel, he said during an interview with NPR, that something didn't feel right about Happy being held alone at the Bronx Zoo. And that I'm hoping Lauren will text me his direct quote, but he basically, his sentiments were, something isn't right. And that was a really big thing for us to have the mayor of New York, where Happy is located, to come out and say it's not right to hold her captive alone at the Bronx Zoo. We've held multiple rallies that hundreds of people have attended, and it's just helped increase the notoriety of what's going on with Happy and make people aware of her plight and engaged in the issue. And we've also have a petition. We didn't start it, but since we started advocating on behalf of Happy, it's grown from about 300,000 people signing it to now it's close to 1.5 million people that have signed and called for Happy's freedom. For Minnie, many of you are familiar with what's going on with Minnie. She's one of the 3 elephants we filed suit on behalf of she's held captive and exploited by the Comerford Zoo, which is based in Goshen, Connecticut. When we initially filed, there were 3 elephants, Karen, Beulah, and Minnie. Unfortunately and sadly, last year, both Beulah and Karen died. Karen died in March 2019 of kidney disease. She was only 38 years old. Beulah died very publicly at the Big E Fair in Massachusetts when she was 54 years old, and she was septic after suffering from a uterine infection that the Comerford Zoo was aware she had, and allegedly they were treating when they decided to transport her across state lines to be exploited at a fair for over 2 weeks. Beulah died 3 days into the fair, and the only reason we believe we would have known that Beulah had died, and we ultimately found out Karen had died, was because that Beulah died publicly. After Beulah died so publicly, a reporter from a local news station inquired to the USDA about the status of Karen, because we had previously raised concern about her welfare because she hadn't been seen in over a year. And only then did the USDA tell the reporter that Karen had died. So had Beulah not died publicly, we likely would not have known that she had passed, and we also wouldn't have found out that Karen had passed. And that's why it's so important to have their rights recognized. They're just treated as things that are disposable, and no one's really held accountable to what happens to them. So since that has happened, we've been really, not that we weren't advocating strongly beforehand, but we've really amped up our advocacy. Okay, Lauren sent me to Bill de Blasio's statement, but I'll get back to that after I talk about what we're doing for Minnie. We really ramped up our advocacy. We sort of inundated the state and federal agencies with FOIA requests to get to the bottom about what was happening with the Comerford elephants, how they were being housed, how a 38-year-old African elephant died and no one knew about it, if they were getting proper medical treatment or any veterinary treatment at all, just to really understand what is going on and how could this have happened. Unsurprisingly, when we got the documents back from the USDA, it really showed nothing, and it just showed the lack of oversight that the USDA has over people that are holding captive and exploiting such, amazing creatures such as elephants. We published on our website, you can see how the information that was there and how there really was nothing. The only reason we actually found out how Beulah and Karen died was Senator Richard Blumenthal intervened. There's a group of local activists who they were successful in getting a meeting with his office, and they put us in contact with him, and he himself personally asked the secretary of the USDA a series of questions, how Beulah and Karen died, if they were receiving veterinary care, if they were at risk, or if Minnie was at risk. And while we did get more information, learning that the Comerford Zoo knowingly transported Beulah to a fair while she was suffering from a very serious infection, and that Karen died of kidney disease, it didn't answer any questions or give us any peace of mind. We never would have had peace of mind, but nothing about how Minnie was being kept. And it certainly showed that the Comerford Zoo was allowed to just irreparably harm, they died, Beulah and Karen. So right now we are supporting, there's a state bill that's pending in Connecticut that would ban the use of certain wild animals and traveling animal acts. And while that won't free Minnie, it will prevent her from being continued to be used in circuses and fairs within the state of Connecticut. So we're supporting that, and we'll circulate information on how you can, if you're a Connecticut resident, you can send a letter of support to the Environment Committee where it's currently, where it will be heard once the legislature reopens. And we also are supporting state legislation in Massachusetts, and that's where Beulah died, that would ban the use of wild animals and traveling animal acts. And I should also add that the state of Connecticut, or Colorado, currently has a state bill pending that would ban the use of many wild animals and traveling animal acts. And we plan on testifying in support of that as well once the legislature reopens. And I should just add, we're always supportive of circus ban bills. And if there's one in your state that we've, you notice that we haven't sent a support letter in, or you'd like us to come and testify, please contact me, because we certainly want to do whatever we can to help alleviate the suffering of these animals until their rights can be recognized. Yeah, so I'll talk about Tommy and Keiko. Some of you may recall they were our first chimpanzee clients. Tommy was our first client, and their case went all the way up to the New York Court of Appeals. And Monica talked last week about how amazing Judge Fahey's concurring opinion was in their case, even though they ultimately weren't freed. He talked about the inherent, they weren't merely, their chimpanzees aren't merely things. So Tommy is probably our most tragic client so far. Admittedly, we don't know where he is. We don't know if he's alive. We don't know what's going on. We hired a PI recently, private investigator, to look into, to try to ascertain his location and confirm whether or not he was alive. And unfortunately, we've yet to confirm his location. And his life has been marred by abuse and exploitation. He was forced to perform in the entertainment industry and circuses, and then he was finally sold to Patrick Lavery, who held Tommy in solitary confinement for numerous years. And you saw him if you watched Unlocking the Cage, the HBO documentary. But since then, as of recently, we haven't been able to confirm that he is in fact still located on Lavery's Gloversville property, or even if he's still alive. There was some talk that he was sold to a roadside zoo in Michigan, but there was no proof that he was actually transported out of the state of New York. And so we're going to continue looking for Tommy and doing whatever we can to find him. And then once we do, determine what we can do to get him to a sanctuary, whether it's working on rights legislation and wherever he's located, or starting an aggressive campaign to get him sent to an accredited chimpanzee sanctuary. And Tommy's circumstance just really highlights what happens when animals are treated as things, commodities that can be traded and sold with no oversight whatsoever. There's a real chance Tommy is lost and we won't find him, but we're going to continue looking for him and advocating for him, and doing whatever we can to ensure that he's sent to a sanctuary. Likewise, Keiko still with the Prestes in Niagara Falls, New York. We're continuing to monitor his situation and assessing what we can do now that his case has concluded. But just know that no matter, even when a case ends, we continue, the clients are our clients for the duration of their lives. We continue to advocate for them, ensure that their interests are being met. And we're going to do all that we can do to hopefully get them to a sanctuary. So that's it from me. If we want to, Mickey, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So this one is from Roland. I can see him. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for the question. He asks if there's a difference in support level between Republicans and Democrats.
No, there's not. And this is just, so in Los Angeles, it's primarily Democrats that are on the city council. We have one Republican. At a state level, generally animal welfare issues are bipartisan, but I have not seen a noticeable difference in support. That might change depending on the state that I go to or that we start working in. I'm a bit, I've primarily worked in the state of California, so I know our Republicans are somewhat like Democrats. So I probably shouldn't say that, but we'll see when we go elsewhere. But no, generally animal issues are bipartisan. And if you look at various states, they have animal protection caucuses. There's pretty, 50-50 split between Republican and Democratic membership. So I believe generally animal welfare is a bipartisan issue, and I hope that for rights it's the same.
Good to know. Okay, so going back to the Comerfords, is there something legislative we might be able to do in Connecticut to alter their practices?
So as I said a little bit ago, there currently is a state bill pending that would ban the use of wild animals in traveling animal acts, and we're supportive of that. In terms of rights legislation, I'll have to look. One of the things we looked for when determining whether we can go into a state to have rights legislation passed or start working on it is the home rule authority that the state grants the cities. And that's just their authority to regulate their own jurisdiction. And so I have to look to see what type of authority the state of Connecticut has. But we certainly are interested in doing whatever we can to ensure that Minnie is sent to a sanctuary, whether that's through rights legislation, just an increased pressure on the Comerfords to do the right thing. And I want to say there's nothing preventing the Comerford Zoo from sending Minnie to a sanctuary. The Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee and the Performing Animal Welfare Society have both offered to provide Minnie with lifelong care and refuge at absolutely no cost to the Comerford Zoo. They would face no repercussions if they sent Minnie, and if we would certainly applaud them if they made the decision to send her to either of those sanctuaries, we encourage them to do so. And if they've decided that they want to, please reach out.
If you're listening.
If you're listening, no judgment. If you want to transfer, I am happy to facilitate that transfer.
Yeah, so actually let's talk about that. So what, can you explain what the difference is between a roadside zoo versus an accredited AZA zoo versus a sanctuary, an accredited sanctuary?
Sure. So a roadside zoo, let's go a roadside zoo versus an AZA accredited sanctuary. Honestly, there isn't that much meaningful difference. They're still holding animals captive and exploiting them. AZA zoos do have a bit more guidelines that they have to follow because the AZA, which is the Association of Zoo and Aquariums, they're an accrediting organization. They're not a government agency or anything like that. They do have guidelines the way that you have to house and treat animals. But so AZA zoos might have a little more transparency. They might have a bit more regular like veterinary care. Certain practices like the use of a bull hook could be banned, although some AZA zoos still use a bull hook with respect to elephants. But ultimately, they're still imprisoning non-human animals. They're still imprisoning great apes. They're still imprisoning elephants, and they're forcing them to live in unnatural environments that deprive them of all that's necessary to meet their physical, behavioral, and psychological needs. And if you were to look at Happy and the way she's housed versus Minnie, just optically, there's not that much difference. Minnie's alone, Happy's alone. Minnie is oftentimes in a concrete, sort of barren barn. Happy during the winter months is confined to a windowless concrete barn that's lined with cages. While Happy may have more regular veterinary care, and you get to see Happy more regularly, they're both deprived of their freedom, and they're both suffering because they're held alone and they're in a completely inappropriate environments. So, you know, the seal of approval or holding up the AZA accreditation, you know, it doesn't mean much. And with sanctuaries, accredited, true sanctuary, and I also want to make clear, just because an entity calls themselves a sanctuary doesn't mean they're truly a sanctuary. There's the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, GFAS, which is the main accrediting body for sanctuaries. And that's a really important standard. Like, it's the highest standard to be GFAS accredited. And so, you know, look to see if they're accredited by GFAS. Look at how the animals in a sanctuary, or a place that's called a sanctuary, they're kept and they're held and treated. Are they bred? Are they, you know, captive breeding going on? Are they people allowed to hold or touch them or take photos? You know, really look at you know, the sanctuary itself. But accredited sanctuaries, the interests of the animals are non-human animals are put first. Their autonomy is respected. They have free will with respect to environment, how to spend their time, who to spend their time with, and they're really allowed to live freely, and their autonomy is respected. And we love the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee, the Performing Animal Welfare Society in Galt, California. I've been to Paws, and it's amazing. There's Save the Chimps in Florida. There are a lot of great sanctuaries in the United States, both for non-human animals that we represent and other types of animals. Yeah.
Great. So why do you think it's been, why do you think it's been so difficult to get laws passed, or what have you seen as the main obstacles?
So in terms of why it's been difficult to get non-human rights or non-human animal rights legislation passed, it hasn't been done yet. So we haven't had, it hasn't been, to our knowledge, at least what I'm working on, no such legislation has been introduced before a lawmaking body. So we don't know if it's going to be difficult to pass. I assume it will be. But so far, the conversations that I've had have been very positive. Lawmakers and their staffers have been very receptive to the arguments that we've been putting forward. And they're especially appreciative of the science that we base our arguments on. You know, while it's a very emotional subject, you know, animal rights, we very much base it on the science, showing why like elephants or chimpanzees suffer in captivity and why they need to be freed. And the only way to ensure their freedom is to recognize and protect their rights. There certainly are going to be a lot of obstacles. No one really wants to be the first to do something, much like, you know, the obstacles we've been facing with our litigation, we probably will face that with our legislation. Also, there are a lot of people that oppose giving rights to animals. Either they don't understand why we're seeking to have their rights recognized. They don't understand that we're not, like, a lot of people think that we're trying to give human rights to animals, and, you know, they sort of make a mockery of what we're talking about. And there are also the people that have a vested interest in exploiting animals that will oppose this. So it's really important that we mobilize a strong base of grassroots advocates to support non-human animal rights. And it'll be very critical in order for us to be successful in legislation. And thankfully, there are a lot of people that support it. And there are a lot of organizations that support it, like a lot of animal welfare organizations that don't necessarily work on rights are very supportive of the work we're doing, much like we're supportive of the work they're doing. And so we think that we can, you know, we're confident we can build a very strong coalition of organizations that support the rights for animals, as well as a broad coalition of grassroots advocates to really ensure that we're successful regardless of whatever jurisdiction we work on legislation in.
Yeah, great. Okay, here's a question we get quite a bit, actually. So, when will the NhRP fight for the rights of farm animal species?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we follow the science, and right now the science. I want to make sure I get this right. You know, the science supports that elephants, great apes, and cetaceans are autonomous, self-aware, and meet certain or have certain complex cognitive abilities that we can successfully and competently argue for their need to live freely and not be held captive. That's not to say we won't work on we follow the science. So yeah, it's not to foreclose that we won't work on obtaining rights for certain species in the future, but as of right now, the science supports the arguments for self-aware, autonomous, non-human animals such as elephants, great apes, and cetaceans. And also the rights we're seeking, the rights to liberty and freedom. Freedom for a dog might be different than freedom for an elephant. And I know the question is about farm animals, but just, you know, the levels of freedom might be different.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see. What are some other questions people have been asking? What can, oops, sorry, let me start over. What can people do in their areas before the NhRP is active where they are?
So I would say if you're in an area where there is non-human animal species that we currently represent that's being held captive, that you can start your own local campaign to have them freed to a sanctuary and have their rights recognized. You can start having meaningful conversations with your elected officials, your city council member. If it's a certain zoo, you can, you know, request to meet with the zoo director. You can see if there's already a campaign in your area, like for the Oregon Zoo, there's Free the Oregon Zoo elephants. There's Leap for Lucy the elephant held at the Edmonton Zoo. In Connecticut, there's the Connecticut Residents to free the Cumberford animals. It's a really long name. I got that, butchered it. I apologize, Jill. Here in LA, there's Elephant Guardians of Los Angeles that's working to free Billy from the LA Zoo. So I would look to see if there's a local campaign that you can support. And also if you feel that you know, the campaign could be expanded to include rights, feel free to reach out. We can provide all the materials that we currently have on, you know, how to effectively advocate for non-human animal rights in your community. Additionally, if there is not a certain member of the species in your area and you want to get involved in spreading the word, we're currently finalizing education tool that will sort of help you become fluent in non-human animal rights and how to talk about it, and how to advocate for animal rights in your community, and then also toolkits on how to be an activist for non-human animal rights. And if you'd like to start tabling, if there's a street fair that you'd like to go to and table, and so spread the word about the NhRP, we have materials that you can use. Just let us know, and we can give you everything that you need to do to table. So there's also things that you can do, and also always share our petitions, talk about our work. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And is there anything that we can, or our supporters can do right now while we're stuck at home?
Yeah, so some of the actions we've asked people to take in the past, right now we're not asking people to do, such as contacting lawmakers, because because of COVID, it's a priority right now. But you certainly can still sign our petitions, our change.org petitions, and share them. You can share all of our posts that are on social media. Really bringing awareness, and I'm gonna have, my battery's dying, so I'm gonna have to relocate quickly. This is real life. Okay, you can't really see me. I'm sorry. I have to plug myself in. Okay. There we go. I'm just holding this. Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to get some light. There we go. There. Yeah, I forgot what I was saying. But you can share all the information on our website and on our social media, just really raising awareness and keeping the pressure on both the Cumberford Zoo and the Bronx Zoo to send Minnie and Happy to Sanctuary.
Oops, I'm on mute. Okay, yeah, great. And I think we have time for one final question. So let me see. Are there any campaigns currently against animal experimentation?
For us, no. We did represent two we did represent two chimpanzees who were used in non-medical locomotion experimentation. And we certainly support and appreciate organizations who are solely dedicated to ending the use of animals in medical and non-medical experimentation, as well as organizations that have campaigns dedicated to that. But us as the NhRP, we do not have a specific campaign to end the use of animals in experimentation.
Great. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap up. Any final last words?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone. I apologize if it was a bit scattered. You're the first people I've talked to today, and I think I'm talking to myself. But I just want to thank everyone for your support, and just know that we're working hard on getting the first legislative initiative introduced and to start working on it. And like I said, if there's any, if you think your city or your state, we should start looking into that, or if you want to work on non-human animal rights legislation in your community and would like our help, please feel free to email me. And
Yeah.
thank you so much.
And I don't know if we were able to get to everyone's questions, so sorry if we missed your question. Please feel free to email any of us at the Non-Human Rights Project, and don't forget to tune in next week for our special Earth Day edition. So thank you.
Yes. Bye.
Thanks, Courtney.
No problem.